why on earth would a parent spend all its time and all its energy raising some other species' kid, especially when it might mean its own kids don't make it? It just doesn't seem to make any sense. To figure this out, we're going to need a special kind of toolkit.
And that toolkit comes to us from one of the true giants in the study of animal behavior. It teaches us that to get a real, complete answer to a question like this, you can't just ask why once. You have to ask it 4 different ways.
The person who gave us this framework was Tinbergen. He was a Nobel laureate who realized that if you really want to understand a behavior, you have to look at it from every possible angle. Simply asking, why does it do that, is just scratching the surface. You've got to dig deeper.
So here they are, Tinbergen's 4 whys. First, you've got mechanism. That's the how. It's the nuts and bolts, the hormones, the brain circuits, all that stuff. Then there's development. This is all about how an animal gets this behavior during its own lifetime. Did it learn it? Did it just grow up that way? Third, we have function. This is the big adaptive why. What's this behavior actually for? How does it help the animals survive and have babies? And finally, you have evolution. This is the deep history question. Where did this behavior come from in the first place?
Now, here's a really cool way to simplify this. You can actually group these 4 questions into 2 big buckets. Mechanism and development are what we call proximate explanations. They tell you how a behavior works, right here and now. But function and evolution, those are ultimate explanations. They tell us the big picture reason why the behavior even exists at all. And you really need both to get the full story.
Okay, enough theory. Let's put this framework into action. And we're going to start with one of the most powerful forces in all of biology, the reproductive game.
And to understand reproduction, you have to start with a concept called anisogamy. Now, it sounds complicated, but it's actually super simple. It just means that males make sperm, which are tiny, easy to produce, and come in huge numbers. Females, on the other hand, make eggs, which are large, packed with nutrients, and way more expensive to make. This one simple difference is the key that unlocks a ton of different strategies. So let's take a simple example, like a bird singing in the spring. How does our toolkit help? Well, the mechanism is hormones kicking in that control specific muscles. The development is that the bird actually learned that song from its parents as it grew up. The function, that's pretty clear. It's trying to attract a mate and warn off competitors. And the evolution? Well, generations ago, the birds with the best songs had more kids. See? 4 totally different but equally important answers to the same question. So because of that core difference between sperm and eggs, we tend to see these very different strategies emerge. Since sperm is cheap to make, the male strategy is often about competing for as many mating opportunities as possible. That's why you see things like antlers and tusks evolve for fighting. But since eggs are so costly, the female strategy is often about being incredibly picky and choosing a mate with the best genes or the most resources.
All right, let's move on. Because after mating, you've got the next huge challenge, actually raising the young. And when you look at it through an evolutionary lens, this is all about economics.
In biology, parental care has a very specific definition. It's not just about, being nice to your kids. It's any behavior that helps your current offspring survive, but, and this is the critical part, it has to come at a cost to the parent. That could be a risk to their own life, or it could be a reduction in their ability to have more kids down the line. It is always a trade-off. And the decision to provide care is actually incredibly complex. For parental care to evolve, a whole bunch of conditions have to be met. It's kind of like a decision tree. Is it even possible given the species biology? Does the environment make it necessary? And, most importantly, is the benefit to the kids greater than the cost to the parent? If the answer is no at any of those steps, evolution often favors a strategy of no care at all. And you can see that trade-off right here. The benefit is massive. Your kids are much more likely to survive. But the costs are very real. You might expose yourself to predators while caring for your young. And every single minute you spend feeding these chicks is a minute you're not spending finding another mate. It's a constant balancing act. So what happens when the best strategy for the male isn't the best strategy for the female? Well, you get conflict. A full-blown evolutionary arms race where each side evolves strategies to look out for their own interests. This quote from Richard Dawkins and John Krebs just sums it up perfectly. We usually think of communication as this nice, cooperative thing, but they argued that when interests don't align, communication and behavior can basically become tools for manipulation, with each individual trying to get the best deal for themselves. And you won't find a more brutal example of this conflict than infanticide. In a lot of primate species, when a new male takes over a group, his best evolutionary move might actually be to kill all the infants. Why? They're not his kids.
And by killing them, he makes the females ready to mate again much sooner, so he can start having his own offspring. It's a truly horrifying strategy, but from a purely evolutionary perspective, it's logical.
But evolution is always a back and forth. And in this case, females have evolved a pretty brilliant counter-strategy. They confuse the issue of who the father is. By mating with multiple males, they create a cloud of paternity uncertainty. So when a new male takes over, he looks at all the infants and just can't be sure which ones might be his. And since killing your own offspring is a huge evolutionary mistake, this uncertainty is often enough to stop him.
Okay, so we've looked at birds and we've looked at primates. Now for our final step, let's turn this powerful framework back on ourselves.
Because, of course, we're animals too. And even though our behavior is incredibly complex and shaped by culture, we are absolutely not exempt from these basic evolutionary pressures. The very same principles that shape conflict in primates can offer some really deep insights into patterns of human behavior.
So, what does the data tell us? Well, here's a look at a classic study of personal ads. And remember, this is about broad patterns, not every single individual. But the overall trend fits those evolutionary predictions remarkably well. On average, men tend to prioritize attractiveness, which can signal health and fertility. Women, on the other hand, tend to prioritize resources.
And this isn't just a one-off finding. This larger study confirms the exact same pattern. When you look at what people rate as desirable or essential, men consistently rate good-looking higher. But when it comes to having a steady income, the pattern flips, with women rating it much higher. Again, these are just statistical averages, but they do reflect those different pressures we've been talking about.
Now it's really important to be clear here. This is not about destiny. This framework doesn't say how anyone should act. It's just an analytical tool. It helps us understand the deep evolutionary origins of certain tendencies and patterns we see across cultures. It gives us one possible why for behaviors that can sometimes seem pretty confusing.
So we come all the way back to the beginning. Tinbergen's 4 whys helped us understand everything from why a tiny bird feeds an imposter to primate politics to human dating preferences. So the question I want to leave with you is this. Now that you have this powerful toolkit, what else about our own complicated world can it help you understand?